Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the IWillAim podcast. Our topic for today is from split heart to whole heart, uncovering the courage to belong. Join us as we explore the power of embracing intersectionality, creativity, expression, and self-authorship with our marketing leader, poet, and soon-to-be author, Jo Madnani. In her immersive book, The Immigrant Journey, and its companion guided journal, The Immigrant Lens, Jo share how navigating multiple identity can be transformed into inner conflict into wholehearted strength and invite every listener to own their in-between space as a canvas for growth. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Will. It's always a pleasure being on your podcast. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is the second time you're on my podcast. The first time we talk about marketing, but I'm really excited about this particular episode because we're going to be talking about your upcoming book. So let's start with a quick introduction in case someone don't really know you yet. Let's do a quick introduction.
Sure. So, I've been in the marketing world for about 20 years, and the last 2 years have been a bit of a transition. So, I decided to focus on my passion project, which is this two-part experience: the book, The Immigrant Journey, and The Immigrant Lens. And it was bubbling up in my journal, and I wanted to give it a definitive shape and form. And I wanted to take some concepts from my branding world and see how they connect in the identity space. So it's been quite the learning experience, and I'm very excited because, as you know, I'm a fan of your podcast and your work. And people like us, we wear multiple hats, we navigate multiple worlds. And my singular message from this work is I wanted people to embrace all of their nuances and operate from a place of strength. And I'm calling it how they can embrace their and. So I'm really excited to share this with the world. It should be out and about in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Thank you. Let's deep dive into the topic. What inspired you to write the book, The Immigrant Journey?
A lot of it comes from my lived experiences, but really the book was born in the morning pages. I'm a huge fan of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and I started following that as a practice for a long time. And every morning, you have to write, morning pages is every morning you have to write 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing. No agenda, no editing. You just say what needs to be said. And it's very Jungian in a way that it taps into your subconscious. So as I started to do that on a regular basis, I did that for a year. And I noticed some themes started emerging. And these themes, they were long, long buried in my mind because I've immigrated now like 20 years ago. So I had no idea that this was still, stewing on my mind, and I have a writer's soul. So the themes that started emerging were belonging, identity, and this sense of living between worlds. And what surprised me was not really the struggle, it was the patterns I kept noticing. And the way navigating multiple cultures taught me how to translate, how to bridge, and how to see connections others miss. And willy nilly, I was doing that in my marketing and branding work, but never at a personal level. So eventually, I realized that this isn't just my story. It's really a shared experience for first gen immigrants, third culture kids, anyone on the brink of entering into a new life stage, and anyone navigating between versions of themselves. So I noticed one thing that was very crystal clear to me as I was writing is that we carry this invisible grief of lives left behind, of scattered memories, but we also carry something else. It's the ability to hold complexity without needing to resolve. So the morning pages, all of these journal, these little thoughts, they became lyrical micronarratives, and each one was exploring a different facet of that terrain. So this collection of verses then became the immigrant journey.
Well, thank you for sharing what inspired to write it. As a fellow immigrant, I really could relate to, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing because if you're listening out there and you relate to this experience, like the episode, listen to it, and put your comments because I'm going to have Joe respond to your question if you have any questions. As we deep dive to your particular book, you did talk about a particular framework, belonging instead of trying to fit in. Can you unpack that a little bit? What does it mean, and how can one apply that in their lives?
Thank you. That's a very meaningful question. So when the first rendition of the Immigrant Journey was born, I realized something. I was like, okay, these narratives, they mean a lot to me and you because we have immigrated. But
Yep.
what about the reader? What's in it for them? How can I extend this canvas that I discovered to them? So I decided that they needed a space to explore their own terrain. And that's where offered a companion journal called the Immigrant Lens. And these are 52 prompts that guide the readers from insight to integration to impact. So the book shows my journey, and the journal is inviting readers into theirs. And the framework was somewhere born between this two-part experience. So, first, I'm inviting you to see yourself in my story, and then I'm inviting you to write your own. And so that directly connected to the work I was doing in the marketing space. So for 20 years, I've used a framework in my marketing world, which I've called Insight to Impact. It sounds very simplistic, but it's very nuanced. It's about uncovering unique insights at intersections, things that, regular demographic, psychographic data misses. And it's the places where unlikely ideas meet and turning them into measurable results. So all of that was fine and dandy in the marketing world, but then the morning pages have been a mirror to me and they've shown me how I can apply this same framework into identity work, into the immigrant experience, into someone who's navigating two worlds at one time. And so the way it works as it pertains to my immigrant journey is you first sit with it and you realize the insight. You recognize what you're actually navigating. So for me personally, I'm a branding person, as you know. So I've decided to brand this experience as a split heart recognition, and it's a nod to living between cultures, between identities. And I've been treating that all these years. I was treating that as a problem, and I also got tired of explaining and negotiating my strength. Like, for example, the need to be seen as a creative, innovative thinker versus where I'm really from. So that's the insight where you recognize it. The next is the messiest stage, which is the in between. And instead of rushing to fix it like we normally do, you sit in that space. It's uncomfortable, but you have to examine it and you have to understand what does this in between mean for me. So for me personally, as I was working on this book, I realized it's the bridge. It's the bridge where the transition happens, where nuance lives, and where people like you and I and many others who are navigating multiple cultures, identities, they start seeing things that other people miss because they're holding multiple perspectives at once. So I think that was very crucial. That stage is very crucial in the framework. And the next is integration. In the marketing world, this is where the magic happens, right? You now know the data, you know the patterns, you know the buying patterns, and now you're about to close. So
Mm.
how do we take that in the identity space? You stop asking which culture do I choose, which identity do I want to over index on. Like, you're a parent, I'm a mom. You stop negotiating with one identity over the other, and you ask a very important question, which is, how do I bring all of this forward? And it's not balance. This whole myth about work life balance or be professional, be personal, I think it needs to graduate to being a synthesis. It's not a balance anymore, it's about integrating it. So, taking the best of both worlds and sitting in that Venn diagram instead of apologizing for it, I think that's a very critical stage when you realize what you're holding. And the next stage is to reset. This was a personal reckoning for me. And I was always thinking about all the what ifs, right? Like, what if I never moved from India? Or what if I have three career paths? And what if I just stuck to one? I would have been the VP, SVP, whatever that what if is. You sit with it and you write it down and you make your peace with it. You reorient now with a new lens. And your split heart, you realize it isn't broken, it's your compass, it's your complexity, and that's not chaos. It's your strength, it's your strategic advantage. So you start reframing that script in your mind, and that's when you start showing up differently. And the final stage in the framework is really the impact you can make. The impact you can make in work, in your relationships, in how you move through the world. You're not performing belonging. Now you're actually embodying it, with all your curves and edges. You just, you get comfortable with who you are in these multiple worlds. So that's how you create impact. The book really walks through my journey and how I went through this using verses. There's a whole emotional arc. There are
Mm.
about like 9 themes, starting with ambition, starting with what happens when you move, how you integrate, the stereotyping, the challenges, the grief that you feel, like when you leave your country of origin, the moments that you miss, all of that. It's a whole arc, and it uses verses to go through that. The journal then helps the readers apply it to their own lives, because insight without action is just recognition, and impact really requires integration. So it's like,
Mm.
well, we're in the beginning of the new year. We make 1,000 resolutions, but really it's the ones that we actually follow through that help us see the impact that we're making. So this is a framework that I've derived from my own journey, and I'm really asking the readers to start writing their own and just make peace with where they are so they can start anew. It doesn't, like, a new beginning doesn't always have to be the beginning of the year. It has to be the point in your life where you're like, that's it, I'm done with the old way of shrinking and apologizing for where I am. I'm just going to start anew. So that's the goal with the framework.
I really love the way you put it, where you share an insight, and there is that bridge that you said in the past. People try to solve it, and now you're asking people not to solve it, sit on it, and sort of experience that journey. The journal, I think, is powerful because that helps people reflect on what's going on. And I love the fact that you said impact is through action. And I think by doing the reflection, you allow people to own that their story into that. In essence, you gave them that mechanism to walk from point A to point B. And now, as they do that, the way I look at it is you're now able to bring your whole self to the work that you're doing. Instead of, like you said before, do I pick my old identity because I was in that culture, now I'm here? Instead, you now bring your whole self. And that's so powerful for people to have that experience of being able to apply what they know and apply what they learn and be themselves. That's an amazing gift, right?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing that. On your workbook, The Immigrant Lens is designed to be interactive, as you said, reflective too. What role do you see the reflection and guided question playing in someone's personal journey, especially in identity and belonging, which is a bit of a complex topic?
Yes. And I had no idea that I was going to, unravel all of that complexity, because it just was born from these verses. So I think reading about somebody's journey can be very profound. And you see yourself reflected, like even when you watch a movie or you witness an experience, you feel like, oh, I felt that, and you feel less alone. And I
Mm.
think that that's the beauty of all the literary work, is to make the reader feel like you're holding their hand and walking them through. But I think where I realized the gap was that reflection without action actually just keeps you in recognition mode. And you feel like, yes, that's me too, but now what? And so that's where I felt like there was something incomplete about just offering up the verses. And believe it or not, I was actually positioning these verses as poetry. And 8 months, Will, 8 months of hardcore rejection. I've sent it to every literary journal there is, thinking that there is, through these poetic reflections. And then, the epiphany just came to me. I was like, okay, what's the so what of my book? And that's my marketing person speaking. And I was thinking, so what can I do for the reader that's different? They're like, what happens to somebody when they read these verses and say, oh, yeah, that's me too? And then they shut the book down and they forget about it. So that's why I created the Immigrant Lens. And that's why I thought it needs a companion. So the book is my exploration of the terrain, the messy terrain that you and I have walked through, or anyone who's walking through that's in between versions of themselves. And that terrain is very delicate because it has intersections of family, tradition, culture, expectation, the immigrant reality. But the journal now asks people, or the reader, where do you stand on this terrain? And what's your authentic self trying to say? And so the 52 prompts, they aren't just surface level affirmations. They actually guide the reader to design, like understand by design. So, for example, naming the invisible grief that they've been carrying. And, look, immigration in this context is my lens. But you could be someone who has moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, or
Yep.
you could have gotten into parenting a little bit earlier in your life than you expected. And that's also a crossroads in life. So, for anyone who's experienced that crossroads, and when you become a parent or when you move somewhere, you may have to make some sacrifices to continue living the life you wanted to live. In other words, you had to survive whatever the situation may have been. But you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and you don't really label that grief you experience. So, first step is to label that grief that you've been carrying. Second is identify exactly what are you mourning. Like, my biggest regret is I would have loved to get into fashion in some capacity. I couldn't because I've got into advertising. I was doing fashion writing, but not designing. So, whatever that looks like for you, so you identify what exactly are you mourning, and you'll be surprised. It's not what you think. It's not that you're after the title or whatever. You'll be surprised with what your internal dialogue produces in this writing. And then the next is the shift from surviving to thriving, right? Like you did what you had to. You took that job, you moved to the house you didn't want to, you survived. But now let's shift the space to thriving. And so, not as an aspiration, but as a practice. And, typically when people say thriving, I don't agree with like the big things, like the big job or the big apartment. I mean, like even meaningful things like I want to have a better relationship with my health,
Yep.
or I want to have improve the quality of my relationships with my loved ones. That is thriving to me. So that's not aspirational anymore, but it's a practice. And so once you've labeled all of that, then you start reframing all of the rejection that you might have felt and all of the belonging challenges that come with that rejection. So you have to honor all of that without any hierarchy. It's not about like saying, oh, I wish I would have done this at this time. You just have to honor it, and you have to give yourself space and acknowledge that I did what I have to do. And now I have to take the pen back in my hand. So Julia Cameron's talks about something similar in her morning pages, and they help excavate the truth. So that's what I'm hoping my prompts help the reader do that. They help them bypass what's the right answer. It's not performative, it's the real answer. So
Hmm.
that's the one thing I've been waiting for, like permission for the reader to explore their story a bit more deeply.
Well, I love the fact that you have your first book that through the poetic verse there is a story that you tell, and then your journal then allow people to own that story and create an impact by applying it to themselves. What I really like to is you point out the important nuance of tribing and make it a personal definition of what tribing means to you, the reader, versus what the generic fancy tribing means, which is meaningless in many ways. Thank you for actually doing that body of work that would really be very, very impactful to the reader. Can I ask you a question related to, can you share a specific moment in your life that it's a turning point for when you shifted from being in between to feeling whole? That's part of what the book is all about.
I think I'm still on that journey. I don't think I've arrived yet. And I always, there's a line in my book which alludes to the fact that, like a tourist, for example, a tourist is always craving the next destination. Like, I want to see this, I want to see that. But a traveler falls in love with the journey. So I think I'm still mid stage in that. I don't think I've arrived yet, but I do want to speak to what transitions have taught me.
Mhm.
And I've been in the biggest one since the last 18 months with my layoff. So that has been a big turning point, like no other. I mean, at some point, we've all had layoffs, we've all had like something broken down, but this one has been very intense for me personally. So just putting a pin on that transition, it's taught me that vulnerability and strength are not the opposite ends of the spectrum. They're actually tools in the same toolkit. And when your identity breaks down in any way, like when you're not your old self anymore, which tool you use depends truly on the context. So if your work identity has broken down, or if your personal identity, you've experienced something very shocking. So now you have to sit back and think that I pretend like everything is normal and keep going, or do I actually sit in that space and see what comes up? And oftentimes, we live in this culture where everything is instant gratification, social media, moving on, moving on, moving on. But it's not healthy. I think there is a lot of, sometimes a pause can be very potent. So that's what I've tried to do with transitions. And for years, I've tried to have one consistent way of showing up everywhere. But truly, is that the human experience? It's not. It's like social media. People are only showing you what they want you to see, but they're not showing you how they navigate between that. No one's talking about how difficult it is. Everyone's talking about the most edited and polished version of themselves. But that's not how you navigate between worlds. You navigate between worlds through a lot of like nuance and depth. So what I learned and what I explore in the book, it's about not just authenticity like people talk about it on LinkedIn. I think it's more about strategic authenticity, where it's knowing where when you have to be vulnerable, when you build a connection, and when boundaries protect your energy. And especially with immigrants, especially with our culture, we have similar cultures, and it's the Asian culture or the Indian culture is always about giving, 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 giving. And
Mm.
then at the end of it, you're completely tapped and running on empty. So I think it's that delicate balance between where can I offer a meaningful connection and where can I lean into the no? Like, no one taught us that. So, in that balance, I figured that the magic lives, and that magic is discovering or understanding how to make your story your strategy. And no one teaches immigrants that. So, I'm hoping that the journal helps the reader arrive at their own conclusions. And your story is very much your strategy. It's where the magic lives. It's what makes you who you are.
I love the fact that you talk about your stories where your magic lives. And for the listener out there that resonates with you, share your perspective. Put in the comment. And if you have any question for Joe, put in the comment. And I'll reach out to Joe and have her respond to you. As you do your journal, is there one particular prompt that you think would connect with your audience?
Yes, I can. So, there's a very lovely prompt or the germ of an idea in one of the 52 prompts. I call it embrace your and. This actually goes through 4 or 5 prompts it takes for the reader to get there. So what I did for the sake of this conversation is I distilled it into a very simplistic exercise.
Mm.
And I would love for the reader to do this while I'm saying it out loud. So, this exercise is one way to embrace your own end. So, let's reflect on the prompt. The prompt is regret to reset. So, take a piece of paper and draw a line smack dab in the middle. On the left hand side, you can write about all the regrets you've had. Okay, the opportunities you missed, your what if scenarios, and I should have been there for now, the should have, could have, would have, and let it all come out. Once you're done with that litany, take about a minute or so and circle 3 moments that really stand out the most. And don't overthink it. Let your subconscious be the guide. Just choose. Just choose 3 moments that actually make you angry about, like, I should have done this when I was, younger, whatever your what if is. Now sit with it. On the right hand side of that page now, the 3 moments that you chose, think about what you can do today to flip that regret. Okay, and it doesn't have to be, again, like, you and I spoke about this earlier. It doesn't have to be something big. Like, I need a, for example, like, I need a penthouse in Manhattan. It doesn't have to be that. It could be starting something very small. It could be learning something new. It could be starting a micro habit in your daily routine. And the idea is to forge a new path while honoring the emotion that came behind the choices you made. And so this is what I mean by embrace your and. You're not erasing the regret. That you can't, this is not a software update. You cannot erase something like that, but you're integrating it. You're saying that I can honor what I felt, you know, there were moments where we all might have betrayed ourselves in some way. But now I'm also reminding you that you have the ability to choose what happens next. And that's the transformation. Not from regret to redemption, but from regret to reset. And it's like ultimately, it's the story that you're telling yourself that can come help you come a full circle. So I boiled it down in a very simplistic way, but I would love for your listeners to try this because really that gives you a flavor of what the rest of the prompts are about.
For the listener out there, watch out for that particular prompt, the end prompt, and share your perspective. What I like about it is it allows you to go back to the past, deal with a particular situation that you have left on the ether and not address, and now bring it back to the forefront and think of how you're going to move forward in it. And I think those are what I call emotional challenge and regrets that we carry. And that bag of regrets gets bigger and bigger over time. But this particular prompt allows your reader to be able to think of the path, the neural network that they create right now in this moment where they are, how they want to proceed with it. And I think that's so powerful because it allows people to pass through the journey and get to an outcome that they might be happy about. In many ways too, I look at it as a moment of closure. Once you decide how you're gonna, react to that particular thing, right? I think like one of the things I could think of is like if you're really hard on yourself in the past, that's one regret you had. Now, what the path would be in my opinion would be giving yourself more grace when things are going really hard, giving myself more grace that says, "Hey, I did everything I could. Don't be really hard on yourself." A new. I just opened a new path, a new neural network that says, "Hey, if I'm feeling like I'm hard on myself, I need to give myself more grace." To me, that's like an example of how I apply that particular prompt. So, for the listener, make sure to actually work on that prompt and share your perspective and how it helped you, because I think that's important. As an author, I think it's important for you to also get that feedback, like how it helped the reader to move on to where they need to be. Thank you for creating that prompt. If someone out there is feeling stuck right now in the middle of different identities or stages in life, what would you tell that person and how they could move from split heart to whole heart?
I love that question for so many reasons. So I think the best way I can frame this is first stop thinking about this in between as a problem to solve. It's not a problem to solve. It's a portal. It's a canvas to explore. The reason that speaking from personal experience, the reason that we oftentimes encounter the great in between. And it's going to happen over and over in life, right? It's not like a one and done thing. It's going to happen to you at different stages. The reason I think it's happening is because something about your old identity is not working. Something about it needs to dissolve because there's a newer version trying to emerge. So instead of like thinking of it as a problem to solve, and instead of like I know I do this sometimes is I will hold on to that old identity and I'll be like, no, no, this has to work. And it's like that stubbornness where, because it feels familiar, it feels
Yeah.
comfortable, I say, let it go. If it's showing up in your life, it means something about it needs to be let go. So look at it as like a beginner's mindset and like, okay, now what can I do with this new reality? So that's one. And second is we've been taught for a long time that belonging means choosing. You have to choose one culture or one version of yourself, and you have to be consistent and you have to be coherent. But that's not the human experience. That's not how this works. Like human beings are meant to be complex, they're meant to have different shades, and they're not supposed to just show up in one. Like an example I can give you from my own personal life is when I first moved, I used to carry a lot on my shoulders. Like, for example, I'm in the middle of an important meeting and my mom is calling me from India because she's somehow forgotten the time difference. So I would feel very guilty. I'm like, oh my God, what does she need? Like, why can't I answer the call now? And when I'm here with different colleagues, I almost feel like a cultural ambassador of India, where I'm explaining Diwali and I'm explaining why we do this and I'm explaining repeatedly over and over And I'm thinking to myself, like, this, it's too much. Like, why? Like, we live in a very connected world, and it's not my job to explain to you where I'm coming from, what I'm taking the first step and learning about you and your lifestyle. I think that we have to allow people to meet us in the middle. And I think this tension about like the guilt and the XYZ, you just need to make peace with it and don't overdo things or overperform when you first are in that in between. So that's just a small example, but um, understanding how to navigate a transition, I would say, what if you stop trying to resolve that tension? I just give you a small example, but instead ask what it's trying to teach you.
Mm.
And the space between worlds, the space between cultures, life stages, and between versions of yourself, it's not emptiness. It's where the discernment lives. It's where you start developing the ability to hold multiple perspectives. And I think that's very rich because it teaches you how to translate between contexts. It gives you an insight to see nuances that other people might miss. And the middle part, therefore, in my experience, it's not about finding the perfect balance. It never was.
Yep.
It's about honoring all of it without hierarchy. And I think that's something that no one tells an immigrant when they first move, because we are taught, especially because our culture is always about the other. If you look at all Asian cultures, Indian, Japanese, all of them, Korean, all of them, they always teach you to put the other first. Then you move to America, which is completely opposite. And you feel very lost because you're like, this is so about the self, and it's so over indexing on the identity, where our culture is the opposite. So you find the space in between, you take the best of both worlds, and you start finding your balance. And your balance will might look different than mine. It's very individualistic. But the idea is to come from a place of balance and strength versus thinking, I have to do this. I have to, like you said, I love the word grace. And you have to look at your own self with grace, and you don't have to answer to every challenge that comes your way. You have to be discerning and say, this is not my cup of tea, and you have to learn when to walk away instead of saying yes to everything. So it goes back to honoring what is your hierarchy, and it's a personal compass for everyone. So your American professional self isn't really more real than your cultural self. Your ambitious self isn't more valid than your family oriented self. They are facets, and you are a whole jewel. You're not just one facet. And the mistake I've made is I've put too much emphasis on one side, or I've overperformed on both. And at the end of the whole process, I'm running on empty. And I'm just like, that's not healthy in any equation. So look at the space between cultures, to reiterate, as a whole new beginning, and start rebuilding your sense of self coming from, I'm going to do both, and that's okay. And some days I will be 80% in one world and 20% in the other, and that's all right. You cannot be 100% in both worlds at all times. So I will reintroduce grace here, and you have to give yourself grace. And the last point I'll make when you're in this transition is, grace isn't a one-way street. Like, if you're being overly graceful to one side of the house and you're not receiving that back, scale back. You need to honor yourself in the process. And I don't mean that in a one-dimensional narcissistic way. I mean that, is your equation balanced with the relationships that you have in your professional and personal lives? Because if it's not, you need to scale back. And that's another thing that immigrants do, is they go above and beyond. And I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to meet people in the middle. And you know what? I think that when you start betting on yourself, and when you start seeing your own strength and see what you keep on the table, automatically the discernment comes in. And I've met some really lovely people who have seen my light for what it is without me having to negotiate it. So I really feel like the middle path is, look at it as a portal of discovery rather than this mountain you have to climb.
Well, thank you for sharing how people could go from split heart to whole heart. I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to congratulate you for your upcoming book, The Immigrant Journey and the companion, The Immigrant Lens. Really, congratulations. Really proud of your accomplishment. And if my guest or my audience wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
So all of the information about my book is on my website, authorjoe.com. If you need to reach out to me directly, just email me hello@authorjoe.com. And on Instagram, my bookstagram, I'm still nurturing it, so it's in its early stages. It's called the Immigrant Lens, at the Immigrant Lens. So find me on any of these channels. I would love an email if this resonated with you, if I can help you with anything. I would love to send you some sample prompts if you want me to, or I have a very lovely visual rendition of the framework we discussed earlier. So happy to send you that as well. So, yeah, authorjoe.com. My email again is hello@authorjoe.com. And my Instagram is at the Immigrant Lens.
Well, thank you, Joe, for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. I loved this conversation. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.